Oh, my name is Roger Huntington, and
I was born in Kykuk, full-blooded Quaker Athabascan native from the Kykuk River Valley, 1944, during the war. My father was a half-breed Quaker from the Kykuk River Valley. Early on in childhood, my mother developed tuberculosis. She was sent off to a TB ward. That particular time I was given to my uncle, but they were having several of their own children, and so they sent me to an orphanage down the lower Yukon, Holy Cross. That's where I spent several years, 5 years of my childhood, until I was 10. My mother survived, and my dad married my mom somewhere in between there, had me come back and live with them. We hardly went to school. We were just going from different, depending on the season, from camp to camp, whether it's beaver camp or muskrat or fall trapping or summertime fishing. Our transportation was primarily dogs or foot. The village we went to all the time was Huslia. We went there when there was no season of anything that was necessary. So we did go to school a little bit. After I was 17, the teacher, I think it was after beaver season, came back to Huslia, and Mr. Kale said, you've been in elementary school long enough, so we'll graduate you from 8th grade this spring. So that's what they did. I don't recall ever graduating ceremony or anything like that. That was basically my childhood. Became acquainted at the orphanage. Somehow I left there believing in a God. I knew about Jesus Christ. I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church, but primarily Latin, which I didn't know what I was talking about. So I did believe in God, but I had tremendous anger. I left the orphanage and lived my young age with tremendous anger toward anything that dealt with God because of my treatment at the orphanage by some men. I was sexually abused and damaged. And so that basically was my childhood. I, by the grace of God, I didn't realize what a blessing it would be. I didn't think I was going to high school, but the Episcopal preach past Keller made it possible. And out of high school in Kansas for electronics, I was second to the top of my class, and so I really liked math. And instead of being drafted and going to Vietnam, where I wanted to go because my brother was there and I had a lot of friends there, I was attracted to the electronics in the military, which I worked in Kansas City. I really liked electronics, and finally I chose to serve in the Army Security Agency for 4 years as electronics guy. I really enjoyed it. Spent 2 years in Japan, but I was a workaholic in that field. And when I got out of the military in 71, a lot of Native politics was going on, and I immediately, with the GI Bill, I went to University of, Anchorage Community College then. It wasn't University of Anchorage, I think it's called now. And then I went also to Cullowhee, North Carolina. I was married to a lady from North Carolina. I went to school down there, Western Carolina University. Then when I came back, because I had a business, I was trained in business management and accounting. I was thrusted in a lot of leadership positions and became a somewhat activist in the Native community, but more in the business end of things. People offered me positions. I was on the game commission. I knew the governor, and my dad was on the game commission for several years, and so the family name. Because I was fairly good with numbers, I became a member of a bank, a board of directors for a bank, and politically I was appointed to the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation board. There's a lot of politics, not a political position. See, I became involved also just in stewardship, the headship of a small airline, which no longer exists. It was pretty common. There were a lot of airlines back in them days. So I had a lot of position. Carol thought I was good looking. I had a lot of ego. A lot of pride. Everything was focused on myself because I was good at my work. At one point, I had 3 private airplanes of my own, just for my own enjoyment. We didn't have no isms like alcohol or drugs or anything. We were consumed with what we did. one of my first jobs in Alaska was to work with Governor Egan, which I was a local government specialist, so I helped a lot of villagers who were struggling in their organizational structures, and it was good work, and because I loved the people. Carol and I, as we went along, we found out, in spite of all the things we got, there was nothing that we were lacking. It seemed like our joy wasn't really deep. But my wife and the boys and anything around was to make me look good, and I enjoyed that. And Roger was kind of on the top of the tree, so to speak, the star of his tree, and many branches, of responsibility and ownership of things. And I was introduced to later on to Job. I think it's 14:7. There is hope for a tree when it's cut down that new shoots will sprout. That tells us a lot. That I was a big tree, but the wrong person was at the top. The wrong person was at the star. And Carol and I were talking about the lack of joy, a deep joy in our life. Our joy at then was dependent on the things we did or the things we owned, or that we understood it was shallow. And my uncle, who was married, actually a full-blooded Tlingit Indian and one time we were out on caribou camp in 1987, and I was telling him about how Carol and I were talking about, and that was around the campfire late evening, and he said, Roger, he's a man of very few words, and he said, Roger, it sounds like you need God in your life. And while on the one hand, I didn't like those words because I had no love for God, even though I believed him. I had more anger toward him than any sense of love at all. That was in October, and early October, and then about the 15th of November season is when trapping starts. But anyway, I wound up out to camp, and there was a guy that wound up to be with me, who was a photographer for the National Geographic. When we got out there, come to find out, being from Crichton University, a Catholic institution, he was a Catholic priest. And that really hit a raw nerve in who Roger Huntington was. And for a few days it was very difficult, and finally I just had to tell him what went on at the mission and how I felt, what happened at the orphanage, and what I thought about the whole system. I probably was a little loud, and it happened in the right place. There was two of us there, and I'm not a violent person. But he knew he was introduced to a new man, and he realized who I was. But anyway, after 8 days there, we going to head back to Galena, and he was cooking breakfast, and I was preparing the snow machines and to head back. I think it was about 35 below, and it's going to be a 6-hour snow machine ride back to Galena. And so at breakfast, he said, Roger, he already had apologized before that, but he said, the only thing that really matters is your personal relationship with God in Jesus Christ. Well, he said it at the time, and I tried to not acknowledge it, but I was remembering what my uncle said, and then hearing this man say that it's my relationship with God and it's in Jesus Christ. All I could think about most of the winter was how my uncle said I needed God in my life, and the Catholic Church priest saying that my personal relationship with God, with Christ, is important. Anyway, in July of '88 now, my uncle died. They live in Sitka. He's a military guy, and my aunt asked me if I could do the eulogy and also sing Amazing Grace at the funeral. Of course, I couldn't say no. I really wanted to find out what was so amazing about that grace, because I wanted to sing the song, which I didn't like at all. I didn't like the song Amazing Grace because it was sung every time somebody died. And at that time, I believe I had 11 members of my family commit suicide. They sang the song with my brother. I hated the song, but I loved my uncle and loved my aunt. So I wanted to find out what's so amazing. So I went to the library. There was no Google then. You couldn't, there was no computers. And I found out who the author was. And then I thought, well, I better go to Carol was going to the Galena Bible Church. And so I went to Pastor Barry Arnold and I asked him about what the Bible might say about Amazing Grace. I might have asked that, something like that. But he handed me a Bible. And so I looked in the index. But anyway, I went to several different places, but really one penetrating area was in Ephesians chapter 2, and where it talks about who I was once, and I was at the time, I was a sinner. I was following the life, guided by the prince of power of the air, the devil, and whom I believed in. My brother and I were talked several times that what are we going to do together in hell, because we knew we were going there. It kind of identified with what I was in this, I think, first 4 or 5 verses in Ephesians, but it said, but God, rich in mercy and love. Later on it mentioned about, by grace you have been saved through faith, basically. And then when John Newton, I read an article, I think it was some sort of bio, where John Newton was asked, what are a couple of things that would you like to leave for posterity or something like that, I'm paraphrasing. And he said, 2 things I know is, one, I'm a great sinner, and the other one is we have a great Savior in Jesus Christ. That spoke to me. The morning before the service, I thought I'd better go down in the basement and practice the song. It was about 4:30 in the morning. The church was always open, and with an intent to practice the song. And I had the words in my hand. And the last step, there were 7 steps from the top to the bottom. And the last step, all I could remember is I went to my knees. And I said, Lord, save me. Help me to be a Christian. But basically, I cannot be a Christian without you. It was an emotional moment. I asked him. I don't recall even practicing the song. Later on that afternoon, when the service was going on, I done the eulogy and I sang the song. And it was a rejoicing moment. I sang the song for me, not for my uncle and not for my aunt. And I believe God saved me.